Welcome to my apiary. I've had some people asking me a little more particulars about the covers for some little more detail in how things go together and why. And so I'll try to answer some of those questions. Of course, I can't remember all the questions at the top of my head, so I hope I answer them. These are 10 frame migratory covers. This is essentially the cover. There's a little more work to be done on this yet, but it's assembled. There's no more assembly work. There's some milling work left to be done. And one of the unique characteristics of my covers, this is kind of a telltale. If I ever see a cover, I can check this detail and see if it's actually my assembly. You can see this joint where this end cleat here actually has a notch out of it here to meet the plywood. And someone asked me, you know, why is that? And they asked me, why is that top cleat there? A lot of times people don't put a top cleat, and that's fine. But he asked me, why do I put a top cleat, and why do I think it's important for it to be there? Structurally, the top cleat is there to support the end cleat by giving it more glue surface. So if you don't use the top cleat, your glue surface is limited to 3/4 of an inch here, and then possibly whatever shim you use here. Some people use 3/8, I use 1/2 inch. So we've got 1.25 inches of glue surface here. And the way I make them, this isn't even guaranteed. The glue surface does continue here because this cleat is pressed up against the shim is pressed up against the cleat, and there's glue in between. So that adds another potentially 3/4 of an inch of glue surface and an opposing mechanical structural support for this end cleat. Additionally, if you did not use a top cleat, then this joint is exposed to water infiltration from rain and whatnot. You can compensate from that by whatever you use for an adhesive. I use Titebond 3. It's a waterproof glue. It does fill gaps pretty good. So that's not a huge problem, but it is still a weakness, right? So the top cleat then covers that joint. It makes the joint on the vertical side, which is far less susceptible to damage from water infiltration, and it gives a structural rigidity to this end cleat. Additionally, on my design, because this is only a 2-inch cleat, then my pallets are built, of course, for the runner to sit here and interlock between these end cleats. So it gives stability when hauling bees around or stacking in the shed. So that's the rationale behind the top. This rabbet in this end cleat does exactly the same thing. It gives you a small horizontal structural attachment and also vertical, and then it's also glued to the shims here. And again, this is unique in my covers. I've never seen anyone else build covers that way. This comes from when I was learning woodworking. I was learning how to build furniture and stuff, and also I'm familiar with framing buildings, etc. So this kind of came from that. I just felt that I wanted a better registration, meaning that this piece locks into this piece, and it's kind of meant to fit together like a puzzle, and also then giving a little more glue surface here, additional to the 3/4 inch here. Now this particular one has very slightly less glue surface here because this customer prefers to have a little more distance between the end cleats, front to back, 1/8 of an inch actually. So this rabbet on these end cleats is 1/16 shallower than what I build on my personal covers, but that really doesn't affect things in an appreciable way. So what that means is when I'm milling my parts, I can mill this one differently, but all my plywood and everything can stay the same. Instead of milling this one the same and then cutting the plywood longer. And one of the reasons I want to do that is because this customer also wants a 2¼ inch end cleat. Again, when I make my personal covers, my 2-inch top cleat and my end cleat are identical. So this is a 2-inch. That gives me 3/4 inch of overhang, whereas this customer wants an extra 1/4 inch, so he gets an inch of overhang here. So then that means instead of milling a separate or a distinct plywood top and a distinct end cleat, then I can just concentrate on making special end cleats for this customer, and then everything else is the same as the other patterns that I use for my covers. Now you may be saying to yourself, you use a 1/2 inch shim, well that's a violation of bee space, and you would not be wrong. If you use this cover as is, they absolutely will build comb between the top bars and the underside of that cover. I do use them by themselves, and that's exactly what happens, but then I also use the cover with a sheet of Reflectix. It's the bubble wrap kind of an insulation, silver insulation product. I don't think I have any here with me. And I can put that on here so it extends all the way from cleat to cleat and side to side. So this part actually sits on the Reflectix, which sits on the box. So what that does is it uses up a little bit of this space, but then it also is compressible so that when I put a pollen patty on here, and I know a lot of people can't use pollen patties because of the pests in their area, but I can. When I use pollen patty here, I've got a good 1/2 inch plus, because there's a little, the top bars don't come right to the top of the box. It's another 1/8, I think. So I've got that extra space, and the Reflectix is compressible, so I can push that right down on top of there. The biggest benefit to me the Reflectix gives me is that with the Reflectix in here on top of the frames under the cover, they can't glue the comb to the cover. And if you open a cover with comb on it, you're going to rip the comb apart, and then you have open honey, and as soon as you have open honey, you have bees on it, and there's bees on this with open honey, there's bees on your top bars with open honey, and it's just a nightmare. You're going to kill bees, you're going to drown bees and mash bees and everything. If you put Reflectix on here, the cover comes off, you peel back the Reflectix, the comb doesn't stick to the Reflectix, so the comb stays on the top bars, so you don't rip it open, and whatever's in it, honey or syrup or anything, is not going to make a huge mess. You kill fewer bees. So this is what I'm going after. Standard 2-inch feed hole here, cut in the top of it, and that's about it. You can see how my end pieces, I don't cut these to a precision length. Some of them I leave quite long, because the second last action is to put this on the table saw and size it from side to side. These are going to be 16 5/8 wide. I'm in Canada, so our beehives actually use 7/8 thick material for the box sides, and that will equate to a box that is wider and longer by 1/4 inch as compared to a box that's made with 3/4 inch material. This is the next cover I'll be building, and a few of these are actually, I've made them out of pieces that are too small for a cover. The 16 5/8 wide, I had this nice piece of plywood that wasn't quite wide enough, so I added to it with another piece. And you can see how I did that here. There's a joint. I can hardly see it, to be honest. There's a joint that's right here. It's called a half lap joint. I'll try and draw that in with my pencil so you can see it. Okay, so that's a half lap joint. My line is a little high here, but you get the idea. I've just milled half of the plywood off of this piece, half of the plywood off this piece, slid them together with my waterproof glue, and I clamped that with some screws, which I take out later. They don't leave holes that are of any consequence at all. So that way I'm able to economize with the lumber, and I'm able to, without having to resort to putting my grain crosswise on the cover. I feel it's important for the grain to be end to end, and I've gone in detail about that in previous videos, but it has to do with wood movement. Wood is very dynamic compared to or relating to atmospheric humidity and rain, right? So when wood gets wet, either from rain or just high humidity, it will swell. And this grain direction, and I know this is plywood, but I'll deal with that. This grain direction goes this way. So that means when the wood swells, it doesn't swell this direction in a meaningful manner, right? There's a theoretical swelling, but it's almost nothing, especially in a shorter length like this. But when you're talking about a width here, that's the width, the direction the wood will expand or contract when it dries. And you say, well, that's plywood, it's stable. Yes, it is. It's far more stable than lumber because each lamination is opposite. So this lamination goes this way, the next lamination will go the other way, and then the next one will go this way. The thing is, this has 6 laminations, so there's only going to be 2 laminations go this way, okay? Besides, the moisture content, the amount that the wood absorbs moisture is uneven. So what happens with plywood, and you've all seen plywood do this, you'll get a rain event. The top layer of plywood will get wet. The second layer, third layer, fourth are not as wet, and the bottom is not wet at all. Well, then what happens is the top will expand and the plywood will cup in this direction. Okay. Similarly, if you have a nice humid day, your covers are nice and flat, and then suddenly the relative humidity drops and everything dries really fast, then this top part is going to dry first, and the cover will tend to cup this way. Okay, because that lamination on top is pulling this way, and the others haven't dried yet, so it has no option but to pull up like that. So how that relates to the cover and which way I want the grain direction, generally in woodworking you put the grain the long way. That's just kind of a rule of thumb. It's not something that's set in stone. But with the covers, because my tendency of the plywood to cup in this direction, I have an end cleat and I have a top cleat securely attached to that plywood, and that will be resisting that cupping. Okay, that's glued and screwed and nailed, and it will help to stabilize that cover and keep it flat regardless of what the cover is tending to want to do. Okay, you know, it's not perfect. It can still have an effect, but it's greatly reduced. Now, if you want to look at the lengthwise, if your grain is running across, the stabilizing factor is this 1/2 inch shim that will keep that cover from cupping this way or this way. And you can see that those are not really that rigid. They're thinner, they're narrower, and all that. So it's far less, and it's much longer. So there's far less help from these little shims than there is from an end cleat that sits like this. I mean, to make that bend, regardless of there's a top cleat on there still, to make that bend, you need to take that end cleat and twist it this way, and then that's not going to happen. So it makes a very, very stable cover in that way. Okay, so for dimensions, I've cut this to 16 3/4. I need a 16 5/8 cover, and the reason I cut it wider is, again, like I showed you, when I'm done assembling, I'll trim one side to exactly 16 5/8, so everything will be nice and smooth and exactly 16 5/8. So this is not a finished size. I can make this 17. I can make that as wide as I want. I just want to make sure my hole is somewhere near the middle, which those do bounce around, but that's not important. Sometimes they're off center by 1/2 inch or more. So my box is 20 1/8 long, and again, this is 7/8 material. So the box is 20 1/8, and typically my covers, the rabbet on my end cleats is 1/4 inch deep. So I have 2 of those, so that's 1/2 inch. So what I want to do is I want to take 20 1/8, and I want to add 1/2 inch, so that gives me 20 5/8. So this piece is milled to exactly 20 5/8. And how I do that is this will come in, I'll cut these on the table saw as a 16 5/8 by 8 foot piece. So I can cut those right through the table saw. Then I take that long piece over to the radial arm saw, and I'll cut it rough cut. So I'll cut it 20 3/4 probably, somewhere in there, or maybe 20 7/8. Then I can bring it back to the table saw, and I bring this right to exact finished length. Okay, the width, again, doesn't really matter. 20 3/4 or 16 3/4, 16 7/8, 17, it doesn't matter. I've even had made covers out of offcuts that are, 18 20 inches wide, and that's fine. Just the last cut then just makes that 16 and 5/8. So that's what I've got here, 20 5/8 long. And as I described before, this customer likes a little more wiggle room in the end cleats, so he's getting 1/16 on each end. So what I do is on these end cleats, I'll make this 3/16. I'll make it 1/16 shallower than a 1/4 piece. You can kind of see that because this is a 1/2 inch wide. So if I put this here, you can see that that's not halfway up that 1/2 inch piece. On my covers, this would be half as deep. It would be 1/4 inch. I probably just confused you with that, but that doesn't matter. So, and again, for width, our finished size is 16 5/8. This is 17 1/2. So I probably had some offcuts that were 17 1/2. I just milled them up because they get cut again at the end. And somebody asked me about the little dispenser that I have here. It's called a glue bot. I don't know if you can see the label on that. It's a glue bot. I think the company is called Fast Cap. Yeah, it says Fast Cap on there. That's a 16-ounce glue bot. It squeezes, it has a rubber seal on here so the air doesn't come out. You squeeze it and the glue comes up this way. So you can actually glue things with the bottle upright, and in most orientations as well. So I don't know if you can see the glue go up inside there. But I'll put 2 little beads of glue on here. One along the top of that rabbit shoulder and one along the face. I'm not getting crazy about going right to the end because I know there's going to be quite a bit of this sticking out. Now I've chosen this side as my flush side, and I'll explain that. I'll get that on there. I'm using a 2-inch 16 gauge staple, or nail, it's not a staple. And I'll put this one in here, flush the end, and I want to move my fingers away from that at least 2 inches so it doesn't go through your finger if it comes out the side. Okay, and then I'll start at this end, pushing the plywood to the table, pushing the cleat to the table, pulling the cleat into the cover, partly with the nailer itself, and drive another one. And then 3 more. So I've got 5 in there. Okay, so a little bit of squeeze out, that's good. Squeeze out tells you that the joint is full. Too much squeeze out's a waste of glue. Okay, so now I've got another one here, but see what I just did? I just turned that around. So my flush edge is now on the far side. I like to do that because I can nail right-handed. I find it awkward to nail left-handed. So I'll flush that to the far end, drive a nail. Okay, next I'm going to flip this over, but you see the squeeze out here and here. I don't want that running down here when I flip it over, so I just run my finger over that and just flatten it out a bit so it's not going to drip. Flip it over, and now I've moved my flush edge to the close side. I just want to remember where that flush edge is. Grab some top cleats. Find the ugly side. And these are structural, so as long as they're not all broke apart, they're fine. I just want to get some glue on these, on the face. This takes actually a bit, because I want that stuck to that plywood nicely. Spread that with my silicone glue spreader. It's nice silicone glue spreader. The glue doesn't stick to it. It'll dry, but it'll just come right off. A good glue spreader is it's an acid brush you find in the plumbing section of the hardware store. I cut about half the bristles off. That makes a good glue spreader, but you need to keep that in a little dish of water overnight. I can clean my brush off there because that's where this cleat's going. Otherwise, you just throw it out the next day. They're not expensive, but you know, you end up spending money anyway. So I'm going to put this on. Let's see, I want to put this on this way, and what I've decided, I want this down. It's kind of an ugly piece, but it's also got an ugly piece here, but it's not going to help me putting it at that end because it's too short. I won't cut it off. That's okay, that's not going to hurt anything. So put these cleats on here, and I'm going to show you something. All of these nails and staples and screws and things, they're essentially clamps. You could put this whole thing together with no fasteners, but it would take you days because you'd need to put a piece on, clamp it, and wait till the next day. And you take a lot of time, and then I don't have that many clamps, so we just nail it and staple it and screw it together just to clamp the glue, because the glue is stronger than any mechanical fastener. I want to show you something. I think this will work. There's a little bit of an irregularity here. So this is what's called a rub joint. I'm gonna nail this on, and then I'm gonna screw it together from the other side. But a rub joint is it's like a clamped joint, but you literally rub the glue. Give it a little bit of pressure. Rub the glue so that the glue is nicely situated, nicely spread around underneath there. And then that's a woodworking joint, right? I've done nothing to that but rub the glue on there. That's a rub joint, and you can do that. I like to go one step further though. Use the staples and the nails, because now that's not going to drift. You know, if I just rub joint it, set it aside, maybe it's going to drift by itself, which they can, or something pushes it, or you know, you set it down like this and eventually it'll slump and slide out of place. So this keeps it in place and gives it some mechanical strength and some further adhesion and clamping pressure. Let's turn around again. It's too bad being right-handed, you know, you do a lot of extra work just getting it over to your right hand. You always want to move your fingers away before you pull the trigger, because that nail, if it hits the grain in the wrong way, it can just come shooting out the side and it'll go through your finger. And you can ask me how I know that. I know that for sure. It can happen. Okay, so we're going to flip it over again. And then I put 8. These are 1.25 inch, number 8 1.25 inch wood screws. I'm going to put right in here. See, my staple came through here. I can deal with that pretty easily. So I just want to make sure that head is not proud. I don't have to sink it a long way, but I don't want it proud because my other piece needs to sit flush on top of that screw. See, if your finger had been there, it could have gone right through your finger. In this case, I'm just going to hammer this flat. Because it'll just sit under that end cleat. It'll do nothing but add mechanical strength to that joint. No need to try to cut that out. You just make a mess of the wood. All right, so now I'm going to lay a bead of glue. I want a little bit of glue on the end cleat, like this, and then a little bead. And that end cleat is 3/4 inch, or side cleat, long cleat I call it, 3/4 inch wide. So, you know, I don't want to get too close to the edge. It just all runs out down the edge. And this part is where I wear the hearing protection, because when I'm nailing staples on this part that is suspended here, wow, is that ever loud? Now I want to put 2 beads along here. I want to get some on the end cleat, and I want to get some on the plywood. I don't really know how to do that best to show you, but I'm just going to run it along here. Just a bit, not a crazy great amount. And this is the left hand. The left hand's not as talented as the right hand. And I can run a bead along that side while I've got the glue pot in my hand. And now I'm going to go to the short cleats. Short shims. These are shims, not cleats. These are cleats. These are names I've kind of made up just to, so on my diagrams and stuff, my cut lists, I can call them something. So they're just made up. They don't mean a lot. And that's the completed assembly. I'm going to wipe up a little bit of squeeze out. I don't want squeeze out on the face of the shim because that'll dry, and that's where the cover needs to sit on the box. The squeeze out on the base of the shim here, that's fine. You don't need to bother with that. It actually does you a little bit of advantage having it there. It seals that up nicely. So there can be a little bit of squeeze out in that joint. What's really important is that there's no glue squeeze out along this side, because when I'm done, this goes through the table saw and that side runs along the fence. And it needs to be flat and smooth. Now that I've got all the covers assembled, it's time to do some trimming. Trim them to a 16 5/8 width. But before I do, or rather as I do sort of thing, I'm going to run a little brand on the end of these covers. This is my little brand. It says handcrafted by Faith Woodcraft. And I'm just warming it with my propane torch. It takes a little while to heat this up. It stays hot pretty good, but I have to make sure I get it plenty hot so it brands properly. So you can see that these end cleats, I can only see every second one here, so I'll do every second one, and then as I restack them, I'll do them again. And also that the covers are currently upside down, so I have to make sure I put my brand upside down. There was one or two that got the other way up, so it's going to be a little bit funny. So here's what this looks like when it's almost ready. See how that green kind of chases the flame around? That's kind of what it looks like when it's getting ready. Okay, so I'll set this down. It doesn't take long. About a count of 3. I sort of rock it a little bit to make sure the edges contact. If the board is cupped a little bit, which these actually often are, then it won't make good contact. See, that one didn't go very dark, so I'll warm it again. Well, you can't see that one. I'll do another one or two here. You can see that. Sometimes you see a little smoke. You don't have to. It can work quite well, even if there's no smoke. I'm giving it a good hard press on there, mostly so that I can feel if I've got the brand nice and flat on the wood. I have had the brand nice and hot and done actually 5 brands before having to reheat it. That takes some time. Get it nice and warm. The shop isn't very warm, so I think the brand cools fairly quickly. Okay, so I'm gonna keep doing those and do all of them that I can see, and then we'll start trimming them. This is the final trim operation. while I'm assembling, I'll quite often mark with my felt marker the side that I choose to be the rough side, and that's the side I'll be trimming. The other side is, if you remember when I assembled, I tried to flush everything up nicely on one side. Sometimes it's a little more flush than other times, but suffice to say, when I run this through, this side will be really nice and smooth and flush. You can see that this end cleat is very long, and that's fine. When I milled those up, I was just using some leftovers, and there was no reason for me to cross-cut that shorter at the time. I could just run the rabbet, use it as is, and then it'll get trimmed to size here. So I think we're ready to do this. Get the eye protection on, dust collector. And this height really taxes the extent of my saw. That's as high as my saw will go, and sometimes it doesn't quite cut through. So I've got my little utility knife here just to slice that off if it doesn't cut through. Most of them do, but on occasion one doesn't. Most of these done and out of the way, I'll give you a little closer look at what I'm doing here with the router. I'm using a small roundover bit. I don't know if you can even see that. It's just got a tiny cove here. Okay, I think you can see that. And it's got the bearing on it to guide it along so it doesn't cut too deep and whatnot. And this is a Bosch Colt router. It's kind of old. It says it's 1 horsepower. Now this kind of a router years ago, and I'm talking the 1980s, maybe early 90s, was known as a laminate trimmer. But it's since become a good little utility router for small jobs like this. And honestly, I use this router probably 100 to 1 to any of my other routers, and I have a few. I have a larger router that sits in my router table, and you've seen me routing probably pallet runners on that. But anyway, this router is nice. It's not very heavy. It's sculpted to sit in the hand nicely for good maneuverability and control. It's got a smaller base for routing on edges of things. So let's see. I've got a piece here. I thought what I would do is, before I get all the noise happening, I would just run you through kind of what I do with this. I've got my little tack hammer handy. If there's a staple or a nail sticking out, the router will find it, and I can just pound that down flat. Okay, so the first thing I do is I'll go around the inside of the feed hole. I don't want to go around the outside, because the sharp edge on the outside is kind of what holds that yellow feed plug in. And when doing production work and lots of different, or the same part, or the same thing over and over, efficiency is key. Although I have found that doing one thing too long is really hard on my body, so I can be efficient, but then I have to mix up the work. So I'll only do, maybe 10 of these, and then I'll go and palletize them and take a little walk and that kind of stuff. So the efficiency is in doing all of the routing on here very efficiently, and it usually takes me a while to kind of get my mojo on with that. But the system I've been using here works really well. So I'll quickly go around that. Then I'll go around this. This is one of the harder ones, because there's not much for the router to sit on, and it'll tend to tip. So you have to have, you develop a bit of a touch with the router, and I'm not always perfect with it, but I'll go right around there. I won't bother with the end as much, because I'll get that later, and then I'll come back. And with the router, you don't want to go this way and then this way, because of the way the bit turns. Almost without exception, or I'll say with very few exceptions, in woodworking, the bit needs to move against the material, or the material needs to move against the blade or the bit rotation. So this bit is turning, as I look down at it, it's turning clockwise. And I don't know how to explain that to somebody who's never seen a clock, but anyway, it's this direction. So then I want to move on the outside, and then I want to go down the inside. It's not as important with such a small bit. You can go backwards. It just doesn't work quite as well. Often I'll go backwards at the end, just so I can run it off the end and make sure I get right to the end, because it's hard to, especially when I can't see it, it's hard to start there. Okay, so we'll go around this one, and then we'll go around this one like that. And then I always try to rotate the piece away from me like that. So I'll pick this up like this, and same thing. I want to go all the way around this in the correct direction. So I want to make sure the bit is moving against the wood. So the bit is turning in a clockwise rotation. If I'm going around the outside of something, I want to go in a counterclockwise rotation. So it just simply go around here, around this lip, around there, back, around this whole system here, and back on the bottom. I haven't always been routing this edge here, but I started to, and I'll do a few, and then I'll ask the customer how he likes it, if that's a benefit, because it actually makes things a little easier for me. Here's another little bit. Well, I'll finish this. So again, rotate the thing away from me, and then I'll do the tops. And again, I don't worry about the end. I'll just go down there and come back here, go down there, come back there like that. And I'm just, again, going backwards so I get the corner. So that takes care of those. Again, rotate away from me, and then go through this whole process again around these contours. And what I was going to say is, we talked about running grain direction this way on the cover, and when I route this corner, like this just tends to be chippy. So if you don't round over that, it tends to you can get slivers off that pretty easily. So when I round that over, it's really beautiful. It's nice and smooth. And if you run your grain across this way, that is not smooth. The fibers are this way, and they tend to chip out. It'll be rough, and you can still get slivers. So that's a benefit of running the plywood grain that way. So now I think what I'll do is I'll start up and I'll do a few of these. You can just kind of watch that process. Hopefully you can see it all from where you are. And routing, boy, the router, you can tell by my table here, there's hardly anything that's more filthy than routing. I mean, it's just wood chips, but I mean, they're everywhere and it's hard to contain them. Eye protection, hearing protection. Okay, some explanation. This roundover on this edge is functional. This helps the cover not catch on the edge of the box when you put the cover on. This round over here is functional because that helps the mating pallet runner to not catch on that edge when you're stacking pallets on top of the covers. The rest of them are mostly aesthetic and handling. Having that rounded over when you grab that cover is really meaningful. To have that round over there, I can pick up that cover like this because it's rounded over on the inside. It just is a whole lot more comfortable to the hand when you're doing that. Maybe my hands are just sensitive, I don't know, but I notice it big time. And not only that, for some reason, when this is rounded over on all sides, particularly after it's dipped, it almost makes it appear that this piece is more one piece with this for some reason. I don't know. It's just the way the eye perceives it. But that's the round over. While we're talking about routers, I just wanted to discuss some of the things that I like about routers and some of the things that you can look for if you're thinking about getting into a router in your woodworking. A router is so very flexible. There's so many things you can do with a router. You can use it handheld, you can mount it in a router table, all that kind of stuff. So basically, and I'm not going to cover everything, you need to make sure that you're using your tools safely and all that kind of stuff. That's not my responsibility. I try to show safe practices, but even at that, I can't be trusted. Don't rely on me. Now this is a good old workhorse Porter cable router. I think it's called a 690, if I can see that. Yeah, 6902. There's a 6902 router. It's not fancy at all. The adjustment for depth is simply you release this lever and turn the motor in the base, and it goes up and down like that. Okay, and you tighten that. There's a gauge here that you can set so that you can see how far you've moved that. It's kind of, I don't ever use that kind of thing. I'll just measure what I'm doing on the base. I'm going to take this off of here. It just goes right in there. There's a couple of little knobs there that go in spiral threads in there. So what I want to show you is this part. So this is called the collet. C-O-L-L-E-T, collet. Now this is a 1/4 inch collet, and this router will accept a 1/2 inch collet as well. And that's it's kind of like the chuck on a drill, but it works at a different theory than that. There's not much variability to the jaws. It's very little. You slide that bit in there and it just tightens on it. So I can get my 1/2 inch collet put in here and use a 1/2 inch shank bit, or I can use this one with a 1/4 inch shank bit. The little routers only accept a 1/4 inch. So it's nice when you get a router that'll accept both. But then the downside is this is a bigger router. It's a two-handed router. So it's not something that would be as nice for this job. And this is one of my router bits. I don't use it very often. That's why it's covered in dust. And it's kind of a crappy router bit. It's a Mastercraft Canadian Tire router bit. But that's something, if you're going to buy a router and you don't really know what you want to do with it, then go ahead and buy a set of bits. Bits are expensive, but you can get a good variety of bits in a set from a place like Canadian Tire that sells, less than high quality equipment because they're affordable. And then what you can do is you can see which router bits you use most often, and then you can go, when they wear out, they get dull. I had a bearing seize up here just yesterday on one. This is a crappy Canadian Tire bit that I'm using in that little router, and it's just about ready to be replaced. So then when you realize which ones you use, then you can go to a place like Lee Valley and get a a higher quality. I really like the Lee Valley bits. They're very high quality. They stay sharp a long time, all that sort of thing. So again, this little bearing is what blew out on that little bit. And I just took one of my bits that I don't use very often. It's just a little hex screw on the end. I took it out and put the good bearing on the bit that I use. Now, I want to show you here, if you can see where the shaft meets the router head, you can see that it curves like this a little bit. And what I want to tell you is that when you put your bit in the router, there's so much crap on that shaft that doesn't want to slide in. No, I'll never get it out. So when you put your bit in the router, you essentially want to bottom that out and then back it off a little bit. I can't push it in that far. So you only need it in about that far. Okay, it's not focusing, I know. Right, so you don't want the collet to be right up under the head here, because it will try and tighten on that spot that's not flat. Okay, so if you push it right down in your router, pull it up just a quarter of an inch or something, because there's lots of shaft there. You don't need it down that far. So that's one of the ways that you'll have a router bit loosen up, spoil your work, or worse, come out of there and cause some calamity. They usually don't cause too much calamity when they come out, because they're not very heavy. So as soon as they come loose, they just fall. I think that's about all I have to say about routers. There's so many different kinds. A lot of them have router bases. Some of them have multiple bases. This is a fixed base router, and some are a plunge base. So they'll have springs and guides here so that you can go onto your workpiece, start your router, and then plunge down into the work. Well, this router, you can't do that. And that's more critical than you might think. If you need to do that, you can't do it with this router. You're going to make a mess of your workpiece. So that is, I think, my talk on routers. And again, get a nice set. This set I have here, it's probably, I don't know, there's 25 bits in it, and I'm sure it wasn't more than 50 bucks. So get that set, and then you can decide which bits you need, and then you can go buy, quality bits for the ones that you use all the time. And that's my talk on routers. I usually like to make a few more covers as I'm going, because if I count wrong, which I usually do, then I'll have some margin to fill in, because there's nothing worse than having an order for 200 covers and then have to go back and remill a bunch of lumber and get out all the assembly tools and everything just to make one or two more, which is exactly what I did last year. I had 199 covers, so I had to make one more. But this year, I thought that's not going to happen, so I made 204 covers. So I made 204 covers, and I piled them all up nicely and neatly and counted them all, and there was 204. And then I trimmed them all and routing them all and palletizing them, and counted them again, and there was an even 200. So I don't know where the other 4 went, but there's 200 covers here, which is exactly what the order specified. I got probably 30 to go here, and I'm palletizing as I go and putting them, wrapping them, putting them right on the trailer so that I can get out of here on, I think, Monday with them, take them to the dipper. The dipper will dip them, and a customer will pick them up there. Dipping. I've had some conversations with people talking about dipping, and it's a little bit of a misnomer when we say wax dipped. They're not wax dipped. They're as much as they are wax boiled. Okay, if you're getting equipment wax dipped and it's literally just dip, that's not correct. That's not getting what you want. You need to boil that in the wax. My guy you know, they're high production. I think it's about 3 minutes they go. They'll boil that in the wax for about 3 minutes. You can see the water and everything coming up out of the wood. When it cools, the wood pulls the wax into where the water was, and they do a final dip. I don't know that it's that much, you know, value for a preservative, but it makes the product look nicer. Just to have that wax coating on it. It's, you know, customer looks at that and, oh, look at that nice wax coated, wax dipped, they say, product. So anyway, just wanted to say that if someone is, you know, dipping equipment for you and they're doing exactly that, they're just dunking it, that's not correct. That's not what they should be doing. So that's of almost no value at all to you. That wax kind of leaves the surface of that product within the first season or so, and then you'll have nothing. You'll have wasted your time and your equipment won't be protected. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for watching this video on the assembly and trimming of the covers, and I'm very glad that this project is almost done. I can move on to something else. It's always nice to have a project and keep busy, and it's always nice to see progress and move on from one project to another. So that's really nice. And, oh, I'm going to really like the payday too. That's one of those things, you know, you go for a long time on something without any you know, monetary reward on it, and then when you get that monetary reward, the delay just makes it that much sweeter. So I don't mind the delay, but you know, I like to be paid too. So that's really great. That's what this is kind of all about. It's not just keep busy work. It's supposed to pay me a little bit. All right. Like I said, thanks for watching. Take care and have fun.